Hey guys, welcome to the Asian Hustle Network podcast. My name is Brian.
And my name is Maggie.
And we interview Asian entrepreneurs around the world to amplify their voices and empower Asians to pursue their dreams and goals.
We believe that each person has a message and a unique story from their entrepreneurial journey that they can share with all of us. Hi everyone, this is the Asian Hustle Network podcast. My name is Maggie.
My name is Brian.
And today we have a very special guest. Her name is Minji Chang, and she's an actor, a writer, a producer, and a podcast host. Minji, do you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you. First of all, that's the name of my podcast. Thank you for having me on the show, and congratulations to you guys hosting a podcast space and creating more conversations. I'm all about that. You mentioned I'm an actor, writer, producer, also a fledgling entrepreneur, adding that to my resume. That's been really fun. But my name is Minji. I'm from the Bay Area originally, born and raised. Been in LA for 6 years now. I just celebrated 6-year anniversary.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, it's been, I'm like, wow, it's already been 6 years. But like, oh, it's like only been 6 years. A lot has happened. And yeah, I came down because I was the executive director of Kollaboration, which is a nonprofit that is discovering, connecting, and elevating Asian American artists. Mm-hmm. And was part of that organization, still am because I'm on the board of directors now, but I've been part of that for 11 years. So my world has been very much embedded in the arts, but also the nonprofit world / Asian American community, and definitely increasingly in Hollywood. So that's kind of like the overarching thing of where I'm at now. But it's been quite a very, to someone else that's like not me, they'd be like, that's so random. Like I've been through a lot of different phases in my life, but to me it all makes sense.
Yeah,
definitely. I'm happy to share whatever I can.
Yeah, we're here. We're super excited to hear your story too, because we can relate to you. We feel like our lives are absolutely random as well. You know, because for me personally, I started off my career as a software engineer, and then became a real estate investor, and then became a real estate developer, and now I run communities, and I do nonprofits.
Nice.
Totally relate to you. And I just want to hear about your upbringing too. Like, what was that like? Like, what did your parents want you to do when you were growing up? And you know, obviously you have a very successful career right now. I want to hear about the very beginning. You know, like what was your childhood like?
Yeah, and where were you born? You know, what were your parents like?
Mm-hmm.
You know, did you live in a very strict Asian household?
Yeah. Okay. I'm writing about all this now, so it's actually
nice.
very good because I'm in the process of distilling and fictionalizing certain parts for what I'm writing. But I was actually born in Davis, which is technically not the Bay Area, but it's NorCal.
Right.
But my dad was actually graduating from UC Davis with an aeronautical engineer degree.
Wow.
So my parents are Korean immigrants. They came to the States in 1980. You know, there was a huge wave of immigrants that came over from Asia during that time, late 70s, early 80s. And, you know, my dad spoke zero English, not zero. I mean, a lot of people in Korea spoke some English, but he kind of was like starting at ground zero, went to community college in San Francisco, went to UC Davis. And I'm the second kid. So my older brother was born in San Francisco. I was born right after my dad graduated. So definitely a young family. Very immigrant family. My parents, it's just bizarre to realize my parents were in their 20s when they had the two of us. And then my little brother came when they're in their late 30s, so another 10 years later. But just, you know, I'm in my 30s, so it just baffles me how much they had done and what kind of life milestones they had already reached by the time they're in their mid to late 20s.
Yeah.
So then we came to the Bay Area, to Daly City, San Francisco area. My grandmother was based there. And we're a dry cleaner family. So my grandma had owned multiple businesses. She's the entrepreneur. Like I realized like, oh, I get it from her. I didn't even realize that. But yeah, we're very, in a lot of ways, kind of stereotypical Korean American family in terms of like church, for sure, heavily influenced our life. My mom was always just sending us to Korean school, wanting us to know the language, know the culture. My mom's really into history and documentaries and things. So she was, you know, it was spoken in the household. So I spoke both English and Korean growing up, which when I was a kid, I griped about, but I'm really grateful. Honestly, like I'm very grateful that I grew up bilingual, even though I'm way more proficient at English than Korean. And yeah, as a kid, you know, I was very creative. I really liked school.
Mm-hmm.
So my parents never, in that way, they never had an issue with me. They never had to harp on me about grades.
Mm-hmm.
I was I guess, like, I don't even know what the term is, the psychological term, but it's like Pavlov's theory. Like, you give them the reward and they're like, yay, like, you know, I really liked getting good grades. So in that way, my parents, and I liked school. Like, it felt good to learn. It felt cool to, like, ace a test. I don't know. I personally really liked it.
Yeah.
And I had good friends. So I was very social. Social, but also shy and awkward in certain ways. But so yeah, it was a pretty normal childhood, I guess. I had a really great time. There are certain immigrant experiences, like having a very severe and tough father, for sure. Military family, colonel. So my dad definitely did not have it easy growing up. He had divorced parents, which was very, very, very unheard of in Korean culture in the 50s. So it's like an interesting household, definitely. Like, there's so many things I remember that are great, but there are definitely really harsh realities. And like, just, you know, my dad, he's so different now, but when I was growing up, like, we had to watch ourselves a lot. His mood could be like, you know, hair trigger. Yeah. And so I definitely remember that. My brother, in a lot of ways, had it rougher than me, but we're all kind of like a little walking on eggshells because of that. And it's just, you know, a lot of those things influenced my sense of self. I definitely had like a happy childhood. Overall, I feel like I had a happy childhood that's peppered with some really rough moments. Feeling othered, feeling different, feeling this one I'm dealing with as an adult, like not feeling safe in certain ways, like having to always like be careful, and realizing as an adult that that's definitely traumatic for a kid to like not feel secure safe all the time. Which I think a lot of immigrant kids have felt. A lot of kids in general, for sure. But yeah, and so school was like definitely fun. I was never pressured really to go one specific route. I think because what I wanted and my ambitious nature and like wanting to be a doctor was something that pleased my parents, they had no issue with that. So I don't feel like I was really pressured in one direction. But my mom was actually the one who introduced me to theater. And like, I started doing plays in church when I was like 5 years old. And I had my first lead role by 7. So like, I definitely was like a little thespian, artsy fartsy little kid. Really into pop culture. I was listening to Janet Jackson, Paula Abdul, MC Hammer, like really inappropriate. Like, I wouldn't put that in like a 3 or 4 year old's, you know, playlist, but I was definitely listening to that from a really young age. Super into movies, super into plays and musicals. So I had a lot going on. Like, when I look back on it, I was like a very active child.
Yeah.
I mean, you have an amazing story, you know. Like, it sounds like you were a super good kid. Like, you're the most ideal kid, you know. Got really good grades.
We're going to high school, Ryan. That's right.
Well, it sounds
all
like
a setup. See,
sounds like you got the creative side from your mom, definitely. But like, when you were explaining about how your dad was like, he really reminds me of my own dad, because when we were young, like when me and my sisters, when we were young, he was super mean all the time. Like, he was like angry all the time. And I think it comes with like the expectation, like, oh, we immigrated here to give you guys like the future that we want for you guys, you know, set you guys up for success. So we have that expectation that you guys will do well, you know, whatever it may be in school, like get a job. And as we grew older, he's definitely a lot more chill and relaxed. And like, I never see him get mad anymore. I think it's just like when we're growing up, they have like this expectations like, oh, I need our children to have this life because we're giving them that better life by immigrating here. Right.
Absolutely. It's a very, I mean, the more we all become adults and understand the gravity of what that entails, and us growing up in a space that we, to a degree, larger degree than our parents, feel like we do belong, and that we can navigate comfortably in terms of language, in terms of social cues, in terms of receptivity by the general public. I mean, personally, I mean, that's like me moving to Korea. And like, even though, but not Korea, like fine, Europe, like don't speak the language, don't look like really the majority of people there.
Right.
That's a big deal, you know, and we have more empathy for our parents, which is a thing of maturity. It's a lot that they went through and a lot that they're emotionally, mentally, physically juggling on a very daily basis.
Yeah.
And then trying to raise humans to be decent people and not be a menace to society. That's a lot to do.
Yeah, definitely.
Multiple humans too. There are 3 of us and all 3 of us were very interesting children. My condolences to my parents.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you had a pretty normal childhood. What was that transition like when you kind of diverged your path a little bit? You know, you mentioned that you told your parents that you wanted to be a doctor, keep them happy. What was the very moment when you're like, hey, I don't want to be a doctor. I want to pursue, you know, being an actress and all that creative side stuff? Like, how did they take that?
Yeah, and I know you went to Berkeley and majored in public health, right? And you were working in jobs that were related to health. And yeah, would love to know like that transition and, you know, what it was like kind of knowing like, okay, I don't want to focus on health anymore. Like I want to pursue acting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a huge significant part of my narrative that takes place between 14 and 19 years old was a relationship that I was in. And I, you know, in certain ways was ideal as a child in terms of obedience, ambition, proficiency, you know, those things, I give that to myself. But that was, it takes and this is where the reality of just being a person, especially an impressionable, insecure teenager comes into play. And in high school, I was really passionate about medicine. I actually entered a bioscience program in 9th grade, which is a very big privilege for a high schooler to have, to like explore a career when you're 14. And so to that I credit my teachers in my school. Shout out to Amador Valley High. They really created a space for younger kids to explore shadowing doctors, doing science projects, like learning about things that you wouldn't learn about till you're probably in college or beyond, right? So that was that, and I was heavily into like I was a leadership geek, still am. So that was all happening, but I was also dealing with a lot of personal struggles about who I was. Definitely have been boy crazy, kind of like out of the womb, and had already dealt with like dating guys since middle school, but I met an older guy from church, sort of layers, and much older guy, and entered a very bad relationship that lasted for 5 years. So it colored my entire adolescence, if you will, I'd say, and it was pretty abusive. And it was really interesting because the way I would liken it is that I lived a double life. On one side, I was class president and you know, over a 4.0 GPA. But on the other side, I was lying and manipulating everybody and under complete control of this very abusive person. And to this day, it's still like, I mean, it feels like a different life now, but I still remember every detail, and it was this former version of myself. But those actually really did influence the way that my life turned out, because I was listening to what he wanted. He had a lot of control over my life. But ironically, just the way that life turns out, you know, I still was able to maintain grades, probably because he didn't let me socialize, cut me off from my friends. So what did I do? I studied a lot. And luckily for me, I studied well because I liked it. So luckily I got into Berkeley. That relationship continued into college. There's a lot, it's like K-drama. But it definitely colored a lot of decisions that I made during very formative years. And I just kind of had to learn how to navigate tough systems that go beyond like sexism or racism. It was literally just interpersonal, like my own demons, I guess, and this one person that I was allowing to dictate so much of my life. How to negotiate with that and how to convince that person, like, I want to go to a school, like, we're getting very personal. I'm fine because I talk about this on my podcast, so I just hope it's not too like overwhelming for you guys.
No. This is fine. This is perfectly fine.
For example, he didn't want me to go to Berkeley. I was barely sleeping. I was going through lots of different crises throughout high school. And somehow I managed to get into a really good school. And the weird thing is that I actually didn't know that Berkeley was a really good school. That's how oddly like sheltered I was. Like I was consumed by this relationship. I only knew what was directly in front of me, which is to get an A in AP Bio.
Yeah.
And just do well on this test. And just that's all I could see in front of me. I didn't research colleges. I didn't know how good that Berkeley was compared to like Irvine. Like I didn't know any of these things. I just applied. And by the grace of God, I got into Berkeley. Still didn't know that it was that good of a school. Everyone's congratulating me. I'm literally just thinking about my boyfriend at the time. And so I was like, oh, thanks. I got into college. Like, that's what I thought. But it wasn't like, oh, you got into a great school. It's like, oh, no, I got into a school.
Yeah.
And he actually dumped me when I told him that I was like, I got into Berkeley. And he got angry at me. Wow. So this is the real on me. I felt guilty. Because he shamed me and told me that I'm selfish and that he was basically paranoid that I'm going to be around a bunch of like smart guys. Literally, that was it. And he was angry at me for that. So I almost didn't go to Berkeley.
Right.
He wanted me to go to community college. So stuff I'm writing about, guys, don't worry, you'll get all the tea. But I chose to go. I stood my ground. Also because my parents would have had, can I swear?
Sure.
Yeah.
They would have lost their shit if I said I'm not going to UC Berkeley, you know? Yeah. I gathered that much over time. Like they were really proud. So I was like, oh, this is a big deal. Yeah. And I wanted to make them happy. So I went. And then that's how I got into Berkeley. That's like the true story is like, I didn't know that it was a really good school. I chose Berkeley because it was close. Yeah. Because I lived in the Bay Area and because I wanted to date this crazy person. Yeah. So that's how I ended up at that school for real. And destiny is real, guys.
Yeah, that's a really crazy story. And it's like it's so accurate when you say that you don't know anything that's like outside of what you just see. It's kind of like tunnel vision, right? There's no possible way for you to know what's on the outside if all you're focused on is like that relationship or that person or your studies, you know. And I think that it was really brave of you to, you know, just go outside of your comfort zone and be like, you know what, maybe I'll take this chance, you know. And I think, you know, that relationship might have been a blessing in disguise because it freed you from those struggles, you know. And I think it naturally trended towards that direction where you went to Berkeley because, you know, if it happened any other way, maybe you would have gotten to community college, or like if you guys stayed together, you guys would have you would have been going to community college. So I think
and I appreciate that. And I fought, it ended up being a big fight, multiple fights, and we stayed together. So I got and I negotiated that, again, in the thing I'm writing, but I negotiated it by agreeing to live in the all-girls dorm. So like, this is how my college life was shaped, literally my schedule, all of it. So we ended up staying together, but there were certain fights that I went to bat for myself, and going to Berkeley was one of them. So I'm really glad that I did that, and I appreciate that. And definitely these moments, and again, it's just to attest to kind of like life in general, that it's to our benefit not to assume that everybody knows what we know. I think sometimes when people are in high school, everyone talks about, this is kind of a sign of, in my opinion, a little bit of an immature mindset, is that we talk about things as if everybody else knows what we're talking about. And I think that's very risky because a lot of people have no idea what you're talking about. How do you know that everyone's researching colleges and majors and has the money to even do that the way that you do? I think that's actually a conversation in Asian America that I think needs to be checked, is that there's a lot of assumptions that there's money, time, privilege, and just resources that everybody has the same path. Like, oh, what if you can't go to college? What if that's not even an option for an Asian American young person? There are a lot that can't afford to, or that just need to go to work to help their families. Or have a different immigration status or whatever. Like, there's so many experiences, and that's what I'm recognizing about my own story. There's a lot of assumptions people made about me and that I made about others just based on my path. And that's like me at 18, 19 years old. which is why I credit you guys for expanding, like sharing these conversations, because I think the more that we share what really happened and what really happens, the more we can have kind of like a more grounded understanding of how life really is versus like what we're saying.
Yeah, it's very, very easy to assume.
It is.
Yeah.
And honestly, I have never seen Maggie this fire up before in her previous episodes. She's like, oh man,
this is a very interesting
I need
story.
to like engage in this conversation right here. I'm like, right, I'm just going to sit here and just be quiet.
No,
you know?
but I do truly feel like things happen for a reason. I always feel that way. Like everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
And I think that, your experiences give you the opportunity to make opportunities for yourself.
Absolutely.
This is exactly what happened. And, like when you were in high school and when you were in college, I'm sure you were still acting, right? And I think you mentioned that, or I was reading your bio, and your bio mentioned that you were training at UC Berkeley as well for acting classes. And so can you talk a little bit about that experience and, what those trainings, what that experience was like while you were training, and then how you were naturally kind of shifted towards like getting into collaboration and getting to know them?
For sure. So the reason why I even brought up that whole teenage saga was that it dictated a lot of these outcomes that on the outside might seem very innocuous. Like, okay, she chose to go to UC Berkeley. Like, it could be many other people who just fill out applications and choose a school. For me, it was colored in a very different light. And when I got to Berkeley, in the middle of it, my sophomore year is when I ended that relationship, or like I escaped it. To be honest, like that's how I look at it. I escaped a very bad situation by the grace of God and my family and my friends. Like I somehow got out of it. And that was like an awakening for me as a person, as a young woman, as a future professional. I genuinely felt like I got a second chance at life. Like it got that bad because I was in a very dark place. I was ready to give up, to be honest. Like it's such a terrible place to feel like you have no hope. Like either the situation you're in is bad or the other situation, even if you get out, is bad. But once I was able to get over that very significant obstacle, that moment, I felt like, oh my God, it's really exciting and scary to feel like I can choose whatever I want to do. And when you relinquish control to somebody for so long, it matters a lot when you get that control back. So that's when like a lot of things shifted. I switched out of bio because I started taking social sciences, and I really resonated with psychology, with sociology, with understanding why people work the way that we do. That has eternally fascinated me, still does. And that's why I chose public health. And I felt like that was a really good fit for me because it was understanding people on a population level versus like when you're doing MD, you're like meeting one patient at a time, right? You're serving one person. I was like, no, I want to know why millions of people are depressed. I want to know why teenage pregnancy rates are so significant here. I want to know why abuse happens here. I want to know why these people are addicted to this over here. I wanted to know these things and understand. So when I did that, I was really already starting to shift in who I was, my career aspirations, switching from wanting to do med school solely and then wanting to do public policy. So that's when I was shifting in that. But once I got out of that relationship, that's when sorry, there's an airplane. But I had exited this hiatus of creativity because from 13 to 19, I didn't act. I didn't do anything like thespian.
Was that the timeline of your relationship?
Pretty much. And it's just like, I don't know, 8th grade, everything gets awkward. Like I became very kind of like in that way, my artistic side became very like, I hermited that away and I cared more about like, again, boys and clothes and blah, blah, blah. But I went to study abroad in Paris, and then I rediscovered theater. And then I was like, it felt like home. And it felt free. And I was like, oh my God, I completely had forgotten this. It was like getting back on a really fun bike again. So that's when I came back to Berkeley. I stayed as a super senior. That's where I learned also that you can leave school and come back. Like I didn't know these things. And I took up theater again. So I did maybe 2 or 3 semesters. So it wasn't my major or anything. But I definitely enjoyed the theater classes and the plays and stuff that I got to see at UC Berkeley. And I got to train in theater in Paris, which is like, how many people can say that? That was really cool. And that was definitely planting the seed. So to answer your first question was, how did I choose or how did I make that change? It was very, very gradual. It was super gradual. There was no one moment where I'm like, I'm throwing this all away and I'm going to totally switch gears.
That makes one of us.
More like nuggets. They're like nuggets of ideas. You're like, oh, this is really fun. But like, no, back to public health.
Yeah.
I mean, your story is very inspirational, you know, and I think about it, and I sometimes compare it to my life too. It's like, it's ironic because I was the worst student possible growing up, but when I got to high school, I did better, and I didn't get any 4.0s up until I got to college.
Wow.
Reverse. You know?
Good for you. This is where I tanked in college. I was like, what?
But,
what's happening?
but to go back to your point where you really felt lost, right? I never think being lost is a bad thing. I think being lost at an earlier age is actually a blessing, you know, because then you can find what you're truly passionate about. I have a couple of stories too on my side. I too was supposed to go to Berkeley, but my senior year, similar to you, because of relationship, we broke up, and it really affected me mentally. So I did so bad my senior year. I got kicked out from Berkeley, and I had to attend community college. You know, and since school was a huge part of my identity, my parents pretty much just owned me. They're like, dude, what the hell? Like, what's going on with you? And that was probably the darkest time of my life. But it was during that time that gave me the seeds to plant like Asian Hustle Network, or that I wanted to do more in my life, that I didn't want school to define who I was. You know, it's during that time where I met people in my community college classes that are really successful entrepreneurs right now. You know, and I realized that just because you went to a great school or whatnot, you don't let that school dictate your reputation or who you are as a person. You know, you in those dark moments, you define yourself, and I think that people who actually go to those dark moments become the most successful. That's why we're talking to you right now. You know, and I think that everything happens for a reason, and I commend you for that, because it is a really dark, scary time. It affects everything, how you feel about yourself, like, and going through not just that part of your identity and trying to fix it and forming new groups of friends, that's extremely hard. Having your parents' approval like breathe down your neck, like my dad was extremely disappointed in me, and he wanted me, similar to you, he wanted me to become a doctor, right? And at this time he didn't know what computer science was. This is like, I'm also in my 30s, so this is like before computer science became popular. He was like, you're gonna major in computers? What the hell is that? He just owned me for the second time. You know?
I wanted your CS. I mean, if you said that to someone now in college, they'd be like, are you crazy? That's the future.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, I always tell my friends, like, thank God I majored in CS before it got popular. All these kids are hella smart now. You know? But I mean, I can totally relate to you. It's the dark times that really define us. And for whoever's listening right now, like, you may feel like you're in a dark situation, your life's going nowhere. But if you continue to breathe, if you continue to live on, you're going to find your sources of motivation that come from the most random places.
For sure.
It's like, so don't give up. You know, life is still so long. When you're young, you look at life as like, oh my God, what is life going to be like after 29? You know, my life's going to end at 29. Like, I'm going to have kids.
It's more dope, you guys. I love my 30s. Like, I can't even put it into words. Right, Barry? It's great.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Yeah, but in your teenage years, like, 30s, I'm like having kids, grandkids. It's like you're fully established, you're hella boring. But you realize like life is so long, and stop sprinting so much when you're young. Take it at your own pace, you know? I think when you're young, you often compare, like you said before, you live in a tunnel, like you only see one thing. And unfortunately, that tunnel can be anything. You compare yourself to other people, you compare yourself to this and that, and you lose what makes you special. You know, you lose your self-worth, you lose all that stuff. And some people let it get buried for all their life, unfortunately. But some people decide to rise up, and we're hoping that the Asian community rises up after they listen to your story. You know, like, it's very inspirational that you were able to divert from a bad situation, turn into something good, and you're constantly building on top of that. You know, and we definitely want to segment ourselves to kind of listen to like, you know, some of the stuff that you were able to achieve like after this relationship when things are turning up, you're hitting momentum, you're obviously on the board of directors of Kollaboration right now. Like, we want to hear all that next, you know?
Thank you. Oh, I really appreciate that. And to be honest, like I feel a certain level of not imposter syndrome, but it feels like a lot of, I'm honored, but I'm also like, oh my gosh, like if this is setting a certain precedent or if I'm being looked at as a role model, yeah, it's a big thing. So I don't take that lightly. And I will also say, you know, there's so much that I feel very lucky in terms of there was darkness, but to count the blessings in the darkness, my big brother, who, you know, we've been there for each other, but we didn't grow up super close as kids, but as adults, he saved my life. My brother, my big brother, my parents, even, it's just very ironic because when you look back in hindsight, we can kind of connect the dots when it's all said and done, right? I can kind of pinpoint the toxic parts of Korean culture, the toxic parts of being super religious, the certain parts of growing up in Silicon Valley where there was a lot of like, in a very specific way, subtle racial tensions or competition or like a specific culture that was breeding there. Right? And so many things and pinpoint like, well, it's this fall and this fall and this fall. And I don't look at things as I like you believe everything happens for a reason. But again, when you're in the moment, you don't have that perspective. This is all stuff we can say because we're in our 30s and we can see how those things happen. And the irony that like the things that were the problem also in my mind, in my opinion, the problem was also the solution. My family, yeah, you could say we had all this dysfunction and that's how things got so messed up and why as a teenager I went on this wayward path and got in so much trouble and in such a bad situation. But they're also the reason why I'm here today, right? So everything can be everything. You know, it's not this binary thing of this is bad and this is good. It's really kind of up to us of like how we want to shape that narrative and what we want to do with these dark moments to then rise above it, right? I don't blame my family. Personally, for me at this point, like for many years, I don't blame my family for what happened to me. It happened. Bad things happen, even under their watch. Honestly, that's tough for me to say out loud in a public space. But I've talked to my parents about this. And I don't know that many Asian families that sit and talk about bad things that happen. Most Asian families that I know sweep it under the rug and never speak about things again. Yeah. So the fact that I can talk to my family about some really bad stuff that happened, even though that's taken years, to me, I celebrate that. And I'm like, we are not that version of that family anymore. We've grown because of it. And that's because all of us went through the discomfort of learning from it, talking with each other and doing our best to heal, which to me is astounding for like a Korean family to talk about their dirty laundry with each other. It's not perfect by any means at all, still dealing with it now, but we've made progress. And so it's to speak on that. Like, I agree with you. Like a lot of our defining moments can be made in really dark times. And also not only dark times, I think also the good parts of me, like the fact that I was really creative and that I liked school and I liked learning, that's also a huge part of me and that also defined me. So I also think because mental health is so fragile sometimes, or like it's tough to completely encapsulate, it's important to also recognize like it's good not to overly romanticize darkness. Right. Darkness is darkness is darkness, and it
just happens. You don't want to be in that spot.
Right. I don't ever want to encourage a young person like go through hard shit, you know, because if we shape that narrative too much, they're gonna kind of seek it out too, maybe. Like, oh, I need to go through bad stuff so I can be a better person. Like,
don't force anything.
But if you find yourself there, it's gonna be okay. You know, it can feel like you're hanging on for dear life.
I feel like someone's darkness, whether or not they consider it to be dark, it might not be considered dark to someone else, right? I think everyone has their own perception of what their darkness is. And if it is darkness, then yes, you can consider it darkness, you know, and take that opportunity and make it better. You know, it really depends on your perception. And going back to your point about you being in a Korean family, I think it relates to a lot of Asian households, right?
Asian family.
A lot of us, like, we don't really talk to our parents about some of that, you know, dark stuff. You know, it's really hard for parents to open up about that stuff. And for you to talk to your family, or whether your family talk to you first, whatever it may be, I think that requires a lot of courage.
Props to
And
that.
yeah, that's amazing.
Thank you. It's definitely been a bumpy road, and it's taught me more than anything to be compassionate to my own parents. To be honest, like, yeah, I have to meet them where they are. Like, they're human. They don't have the tools to talk about feelings, or they haven't. They certainly did not get that from their parents.
Yeah.
So to a large degree, my maturity and my brother, again, I'm lucky I have my brothers, but because we talk, but it's like showing grace to the fact that, like, they don't know how to talk about mental health. They don't know. They like, this is nonsense to them.
Yeah, exactly.
It is.
Yeah.
Mental health to your, like, especially your parents' generation, it's like, bro, like, we came from war to come here to give you education.
Yeah.
You're here to talk to me about mental health?
They were talking about survival, right? And so it's okay for us to care about that. We have the luxury to do that. And I think if we embrace that, then that's fine. Because then we're like collectively rising, right?
Yeah.
But if you walk into this conversation kind of like entitled, like, you should know this and you should care about it. Like, bro, you try to like make a living, again, in a country you don't know the language, you don't know the culture.
Exactly.
But, hey, hats off to them, man.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to do that.
No. But yeah, I mean, these are our stories, so it just is what it is. And then to go into kind of what collaboration was, after college, I was still really passionate. Given have transition, and this is how old I am, but I found YouTube during college. That's when it came into existence. And that's how I discovered Collab, because suddenly people were sharing videos online, and I was like, what the heck is this?
On YouTube? Oh no, I think I'm older than you.
But it became really popular, right? I feel like after college, but that's how I discovered Asian American creative scene. It definitely planted seeds over the years. And then, like, I'd always dabbled in this idea of like, oh, that'd be really cool to like do movies, like just work in films as an actor, as a director. Like, I just want to work in Hollywood. And then, so yeah, I worked in public health for 3.5, almost 4 years after college.
Okay.
And during that time is when I started volunteering for Collaboration.
Yeah.
So everything kind of overlapped with each other. I just started doing stuff on the side hustle of like, this is something I'm really passionate about, and I'll do this as an extracurricular, if you will. And that's how things started to continue to shift. So it's Collaboration. I started the San Francisco chapter with friends. And then a couple years into that, I started taking acting classes because I'd been around all these like amazing artists that I watched on YouTube. Yeah. I met David Choi, I met Keena Grannis, I met Asia Raphael, Clara. Like, I just met all these people, and I was like, they're doing it. Yeah. What if I did it?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, success does leave clues, and I'm curious too. Like, what was that transition like from your full-time job to like becoming an entrepreneur? Like, how did you break it out to your parents? And you bring up a really good point too. You know, because a lot of people in the Asian Hustle Network are like, hey, I want to do this and that. But it doesn't exactly have to be like a cold turkey kind of thing where you quit your job and you figure it out. It can be a gradual process. You know, for you, you're planting the seeds already as you had a job to progress into this career that fit your vision. You know, how did your parents take that? How did you take that? What's transition like?
To clarify, I wasn't much of a goal setter. So this is where I feel like this is how I changed in my 30s. At that age, when I was like going through all these changes, I was more of like a dreamer. And dreaming is great. I'm not at all not condoning that. But dreams without a deadline or a timeline or measurable, KPIs, they're just ideas. You know what I mean? So at the time, I wasn't setting myself on any sort of goal deadline. I wasn't giving any sort of structure to the things I wanted to do. I just had ideas of what I wanted to do. So it ended up working out, thank God. But like at the same time, I could have planned a little more.
Turned out perfectly okay.
Yeah. So I worked in public health. I worked in violence prevention. So I worked in domestic violence prevention. It was very much part of my soul because of what I went through as a teenager. And then I actually worked in tech for a couple of years. I wanted to make more money. I wanted to explore corporate life. I wanted to live in San Francisco proper. So I bounced and I worked at Macy's.com, which was like one of the best experiences of my life. And it was a test to my will, basically, because PK, the founder of Collaboration, he basically when I asked him at 20 years old, I was like, PK, I want to be an actor. It's when I I was like shooting my shot. Yeah. And I was like, PK, you're the one that's telling everyone, go be an artist, like pursue your dream. I want to be an actor. And he's like, don't do it. That was his So he wasn't like, don't do it. He's like, don't do it yet. Because I was still in college at that time. And he's like, you need to graduate from Berkeley. He's like, do not drop out of Berkeley. And he's like, after you get a job and after you're comfortable and after you have stability, if you're willing to give that up to get rejection and unstable pay and like a really different hustle life, right. Like he literally framed it as like, maybe you actually want it. That's how he framed it. And I was like, whoa, this is not what I thought you were going to say to me, man. I thought you were going to like give me all your connections and tell me where to go and who to talk to.
Like my dad. My dad's like, you can't do anything else till you finish your degree. I was like, all right, fine.
Yeah, but and this honestly though, it's like you need to hear no's though. Honestly, I really I personally value people who have given it to me straight.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely like his advice because I feel like he's probably had a lot of youngsters come up to him and say like, I want to be this, I want to be an actor. But then they quit after getting a few rejections, you know?
It's tough as a young
yeah,
person.
He wanted to make sure you had thick skin, you know? And
I
think like going through all these rejections, I would love to like know like what your mindset was like and like how you were able to kind of overcome those. Like what were you feeling like? I'm sure you've had rejections here and there. And like, I mean, we've all had rejections, right? And so like, what was your mindset like at that time?
I think acting definitely taught me that honestly to expect rejection, to say like the reality of this industry in this specific vocation is that if you are succeeding 10% of the time, you're doing really well. Yeah. Like your rate of success is actually very low, but that means that you got to be trying over and over and over again. The expectation is you're not going to succeed very often, but that means that you got to try a gazillion times, because if you want to succeed a bunch of times, that means you got to try times, 10.
All you need is one. I mean,
right. Exactly.
One.
So I'm eternally grateful. I actually just did an Instagram live last week with PK to promote our Empowered conference because I became his successor. After volunteering for Collaboration San Francisco, he stepped down as executive director. I got tapped on the shoulder to take his job, to be paid to run Collaboration, the whole shebang. Wow. And I actually turned that down for a year because I was just like, y'all are crazy. Like, I can't do that. Like, I really thought it was just bigger than me, than life. And that year was, and PK was one of the people that really believed in me. He gave me good advice. He was looking out for me, for real, and I think his advice changed my life 100%. And his belief in me changed my life, because he didn't like shove anything down my throat in either situation. He just more like gave it his opinion with as much sincerity and care, and let me take with it what I would. And I had to figure it out for myself, right? There's only so much advice you can give someone because they're on their path. You just give them as much as you can. That's what he gave me. And so that year where I was like mulling it over, I had started acting class during that year, and I really liked it. I got beginner's luck. The first audition I did was for Intel. It was a commercial, and I booked it. Playing a Chinese American, by the way.
No.
And I was like, they're going to know. This is a lie. But, the set was run by like a white casting. I was like, I don't think they care, but like they just need an Asian. That was ironic. But like in my mind, there are enough seeds and enough things that I was doing to kind of feed this idea like, oh, maybe I can do it. So you never know what the one thing is. You got to build evidence. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, okay, I booked a job. I'm taking classes. I'm doing this seriously. I'm investing in it. I'm spending money on casting websites. I'm doing my headshots. It's like one thing at a time builds confidence. Exactly. And then you also got a plan. And that's where my friends did come into play, and like having a financial cushion, having some semblance of like, what am I diving into? Yeah. Because then you can make a sound decision, and that you can defend and that you can back, right? Because if you're making a brash decision, I mean, life is full of that. You got to take risks, but you also pay the consequences if you just dive into a tank full of sharks and you're like covered in blood. You know what I mean? Like, don't do that.
It kind of goes back to start small and think big. It's super important to start small too, because I think a lot of people tend to think in their goals and like they want to see big results happen like overnight.
Right,
And as
exactly.
you know, as you got older, that's typically not the case. You know, I think great things takes time, and people have to move at their own pace too. Like you can't be like, oh my god, my friend's doing this and that,
Yeah.
or she's a full blown actress or full blown entrepreneur. I can be like that way too. Like everyone, you may not see it, but there's more to this person's story than what they show you. You know?
Absolutely.
It could be their
Absolutely.
connections, their parents' connections, their hard work, their late hours. Like you don't know.
For
you know?
sure.
But
What I've noticed in like the artist world, I was so lucky. I think being part of Kollaboration as like a producer, as like putting on these showcases, just being around artists in general, I was getting educated on how to be an entrepreneur, how to be my own brand or whatever, and how to run collab because I was in the community, I was in this environment.
Right.
There's a difference. There's mad talented people out there. There's no shortage of people with raw talent.
Yeah.
But if you want to be talented and successful, that's a whole other situation.
Right.
That means that you take yourself seriously, that you discipline yourself, you do the work, you have a good attitude, you are professional. I could like list this out. I actually thought about writing it out somewhere so that, in my opinion, what I feel like I've been sponging for the last 11 years, watching other people succeed and fail. Because some people, they rode the YouTube wave. Some people did it the independent, like album way, Kickstarter way. I've seen some different of successful journeys with pitfalls and peaks. And you got to be determined. You have to have confidence in yourself. But like that confidence comes at a price. You have to work on that. Like there's so many facets to it. There's no formula, but there are traits that seem to be pretty consistent across successful people, and even that word is very subjective. Like how do you define success? Some people, I feel like that's where we're at in 2020, especially right now, right? We're reevaluating what makes our time and effort worthwhile. Is it money? Is it attention? Is it working for like a big ass brand and ending up in Forbes? I don't know, maybe that's your cup of tea. That's not mine, but that's cool if it's yours, but it doesn't have to be mine.
Exactly.
Right. So
everyone has their own path, and I in this day and age, it's very easy to just like look online and see what other people are doing and like think, oh, if he is able to make it on YouTube, like I should probably do that too. It's very easy to follow.
Don't forget that social media is a lie.
Yeah, exactly. But you really have to think about like, what are you good at? What makes you unique so that you can really excel in your own field, because no one can do it the same way you can do it.
Right.
Everyone has their own flavor and their own spice, and you just have to figure out like what it is that you're great at.
For sure.
I guess as we're coming up to the top of the hour, we can kind of just recap all the key points that we talked about so far. I mean, you have an amazing story so far, and just to talk about some of the key points, some of my big takeaways from this is like, everyone moves life at their own pace. Darkness is not exactly a bad thing. You find your own path eventually. Just don't ever feel like you're alone too. There's so much support around you that once you get your eyes out of the tunnel a little bit, you can kind of see the support system, like your brother, your parents. You kind of appreciate things a lot more. And when one path closes for you, like a new opportunity opens for you. And another thing that you really brought up too is start small and think big. You had your eyes on becoming an actress and becoming more involved with collaboration, and you made it happen. Some people will just give themselves a lot of excuses like, hey, life is too hard right now. I have my job, I have my friends, I can't do any of this. But you made time for it. You turned into a passion. Now you're a full-blown entrepreneur. You're highly successful. When we talk to our community, you're like really well known. I was talking to my own personal network. I'm like, who should I interview that's a strong female boss? And they're like, oh, Minji Chang. I'm like, okay, cool. I'll reach out to her. So I think you did absolutely well, like given the hardships that everyone has, and it's truly inspirational for our community to listen to that too. Everyone usually thinks like the Asian life is like sort of perfect. So you go to a great school, you get a great job, but you show that you don't have to take the conventional path to become successful.
Absolutely. And I also want to say thank you. Well, thank you times 1,000. That's really, really sweet and kind. And I also want to say, if people aren't, if it doesn't, I've met people that they're like, oh, my life's really boring and very vanilla. And And again, that it feeds into kind of that comparison thing that you're talking about too.
Yeah.
If that's the case, if you feel that, like, I don't want to shame anybody for not having drama, like,
Yeah.
But there is a lot of life. The way that I would frame it is there's so much life to be lived. And so if there's more that you want to do, like, think about what you want to do. And that's really a choice of like how you elect to spend your time. And whether that's like you get inspired because you watched a great movie or you listen to a great song that moved you to like feel alive, like pay attention to those feelings, because that'll kind of give you clues as to like what ignites your fire. There's something that lights up every person, right? And just because you haven't had a quote unquote interesting life so far, or whatever that even means, right? You have right now and moving forward, to make it as interesting as you want, right? And I really want to empower people to choose and to remember the agency of choice, because that's one thing in my young life that I gave up and that I don't ever want to take for granted. I don't think I take that for granted. But that comes with a lot too, because you're taking responsibility for your life too. That's a really tough thing. And if you're a hustler, you need to take responsibility for everything. If you're going to sit there and cry and complain and say it's everything's fault, it's Trump's fault, it's like white America's fault. Like, yeah, there are problems everywhere. Everybody can kind of list off like all the things that are up against them. Time, or I'm too young, or that person didn't want to help me. And even give me a shot. Everybody can do that. You can fixate on those things, or you can just take responsibility like, hey, this is my life. This thing didn't work out fine. What can I learn from that? And what do I want to have happen? And then be relentless about making that happen, because attitude goes such a long way. That's a very key thing that I've seen across, that I feel like very privileged to see people with very admirable attitudes. They're not all the same personality, but they have an attitude of like, they're not going to let small things become the roadblock to why their opportunities stop. If they get into that shitty attitude, honestly, sorry, I'm just like cruising, but like it could be the thing that like ends it. Because no one, who would you kind of like, would you be the person that people want to work with? That's a big question. Are you trustworthy? Are you, decent to be around? Hopefully fun to be around. Like all these things, it's good things to ask somebody who wants to do something different, because you can't just walk into a room demanding everybody to give you everything you want. And like, you got to see how it's symbiotic and collaborative. And that's easier said than done, but that's what part of the things that I've learned.
That's awesome. I mean, we do appreciate you being on our podcast,
Thank you for having me.
We're super excited. Like, how can our listeners reach out to you and learn more about you?
You can follow me at Minjizi. It's a nickname that's stuck on Instagram.
Yeah.
And my podcast is called First of All. I talk about a lot of these kinds of things: mental health, dating, my parents, like all that stuff ad nauseum on a weekly basis. You can check out First of All.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
We'll include that in the show notes.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah.
Thank you
so much for being on the show.
Yeah, it's amazing having you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Minji.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. And honestly, again, congratulations to you guys. I really admire the Asian Hustle Network. It's so inspiring for me to see all the things you're sharing in that space. I really appreciate you guys.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thanks, Minji.
Bye.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to the show.
We would like to get to the top 10 on iTunes, so be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We release an episode every single Wednesday, so stay tuned.
Thank you guys so much.